Welcome to the Butterfly Tumblr Radio channel. Are you ready to start today's story? Let's get started. In this story filled with betrayal and revenge, what kind of upheaval does the protagonist's life experience? How does an ordinary young man from the countryside gradually uncover his wife's infidelity and plan a shocking counterattack? And when old love leaves and new love arrives, how does he redefine family and love? Let's follow the story together to explore the human nature and emotional entanglement behind it. I am from the countryside. My name is Tom Evans. I finished a 2-year study in animal husbandry. My ultimate desire was to open my own feed store and establish a family after graduating from community college. I married my high school sweetheart Linda. We had known each other since childhood, and I couldn't see myself with anybody else. Linda, a beautiful brunette, kept her body despite having 2 sons. I was happy to call her my wife and would do anything for her. However, Linda encountered one problem: she envied others who led a lavish lifestyle. She adored reading the newspaper society section and subscribed to publications that depicted the luxurious lifestyle. At the dentist's office, she read automobile magazines and was well versed in the world of premium vehicles. She was familiar with several designers and their apparel collections. Her main aim was to become more prominent, which I could not satisfy, so I accepted a job at a posh feed store in Omaha that catered to affluent folks. This move brought us closer to the city and allowed me to continue working on my interest. I enjoyed and excelled at my profession, delivering individualized service to consumers and being rewarded with flexible work hours. Linda preferred city life to country living and was satisfied for a while when she opted to work. We began enrolling the children in child care, which they did not seem to dislike. Linda was hired by Gilbert Medical, a medical equipment company, and worked in the office. I enjoyed dressing up and meeting folks outside of the rural community. She grew more focused on her profession, leaving me to take care of the boys the majority of the time. I was responsible for dropping them off and bringing them up from daycare, making meals and getting them ready for bed. I also accepted the job of cleaning the house while she worked on polishing her clothing. We collected money each month with the intention of ultimately purchasing my own feed store. Even though she was working, it appeared that we would no longer be able to save money. A portion of our wages went toward child care, but the majority was spent on beauty treatments, manicure salons and expensive clothing. I couldn't figure out why. Even though we were both working, our savings were decreasing when I brought it up. She became angry and agitated, so I stopped mentioning it instead. I set up a second savings account. She began working extra and receiving personal phone calls, becoming less attentive and aloof. She began discussing purchasing a newer, fancier automobile and even proposed breast implants. I was sure she was having an affair. I might be a simple guy, but I wasn't naive. At the time, I didn't even want to save our marriage. I simply wanted to get everything figured out and move on before it was too late. It was difficult to pinpoint anything because I didn't know her coworkers, but I suspected that if something was going on, it was with someone at work. Carl and Miles were 2 of my wonderful coworkers who were not highly educated but worked hard. Even though I was their boss, I never acted like it, and we all collaborated flawlessly. They'd be valuable allies in my scheme. On Wednesdays, I noticed Linda dressing up in exquisite lingerie and her nicest outfits. She began taking longer to get ready for work, giving me the opportunity to put my plan into action. I alerted my coworkers about the situation, and they agreed to cover for me with deliveries and appointments. I parked near the entrance to the Gilbert Medical Plant park lot and spent the time reading. Around 11:00 a.m., Linda left work and drove to a nearby Holiday Inn. She parked far away from the office, and shortly thereafter, a man in a red Corvette arrived and parked at the other end of the lot. When they both exited and went to room 117, my suspicions were confirmed. Feeling disheartened and uneasy, I departed to return to work. I need some time to plan out my next move before departing. I let out my aggravation by cutting 2 of her valve stems with my wire cutters. The remainder of the day passed, and I eventually picked up the kids' cooked supper and asked Linda about her day. She stated she had a flat tire which a coworker assisted her with, and we didn't talk about it anymore. The next morning, after dropping the boys off at daycare, I stopped by the office. It didn't take me long to recognize the red Corvette. Fortunately for me, the guy had his own dedicated parking space replete with a notice that stated Richard Hart, the distribution manager. Carl's wife worked in Gilbert's personnel department. By that afternoon, I had all the information about this individual. Most importantly, he was already married. He'd even received criticism for making inappropriate statements to a coworker and had some problems with his expense accounts. I obtained his address, phone numbers, cell phone digits, and even his SSN. But I had no idea what to do with any of that information. We've been married for 8 years. His wife's name was Amy. We worked hard all day. And Carl Miles and I were able to have a cold one before I had to pick up the kids. I still didn't know what my next step would be, but I had a sense it will all come together shortly. Attempting to remain calm and think logically, but I was becoming angrier by the day. Sometimes I'd catch myself silently crying, feeling broken and unable to mend myself. Living with Linda became increasingly difficult with each passing minute. I just wanted out. I had another stroke of luck the following day when I remembered Eleanor Gilbert, one of my most important clients. Eleanor and I clicked. I made an effort to make her feel good. I was thinking about how I could utilize our friendship to my advantage. Grace, Eleanor's daughter, happened to stop by at that time. She was in her final year of veterinary school. Eleanor left to do some barn chores, and Grace and I chatted for almost an hour. I enjoyed the conversation, but felt a little terrible afterwards. It passed quickly. I spent the weekend doing some welding in my garage. I created a little flat steel piece and secured 4 robust points to it using concrete nails, ensuring that they were tough and unyielding. The dish was around 6 by 6, and it signaled the start of my retribution scheme. Through some justifiable harassing on Tuesday, I caught sight of Eleanor. I was feeling sad when unpacking the order. Not my typical upbeat self. Tom, what's up? You seem weird today, she said. I replied, Eleanor, I've got some personal stuff. Eleanor, sorry. I'm not in good company right now. Let's have some coffee and speak about this. We returned to the house and moved into the kitchen with all of the stainless steel and granite. It looked like something from a high-end magazine. I thought to myself, Linda would love this. Eleanor set the coffee down, leaned forward, and asked, so how can I help you, Tom? I said honestly, Marge, I'm not sure, but maybe talking about it will help. My wife Linda works at Gilbert Medical, and I believe she is being coerced into something she does not want to do by one of her bosses. The problem is that I cannot prove it. Eleanor asked, what makes you believe that is happening? I explained, it's just small stuff. But last week I saw them both at the Holiday Inn. Linda does not know I am aware of this, but I am unsure how to bring it up. I'm not sure if she feels obligated or if she enjoys it. Our family's life is deteriorating, and she no longer appears to be concerned about them. That's what bothers me the most. She keeps everything quiet. Eleanor inquired, who is the guy? I assumed his name is Richard Hart. I'm not sure if Linda works for him or if they are in different parts of the plant. I never saw the guy. Eleanor offered. You want me to see if I can help? I paused and lowered my look. If there's an opportunity to handle things quietly, count me in, but I'm not wanting to make a scene. She agreed. All right, let me figure it out. See you next Thursday with those oats. I thanked her as I prepared to split. I asked where Grace was. Back in school. She will be home this weekend. Why don't you invite the lads up so she may meet them? Well, it turned out better than intended. I think Linda won't object if I take the boys out for a while. This may be a good weekend. The next morning, it rained cats and dogs. Linda was all dressed up for a special day again. and I just stood there quietly watching her. After dropping off the children to the daycare, I stopped by work. The lads were ready to cover my morning shifts. Carl was going to borrow my truck, make the deliveries and document everything. I just needed to sign off when I got back. Miles brought his cousin's van, and I loaded a floor jack into the back. We had hooked my steel plate to the jack's lift. I went to the Holiday Inn after the trucks were loaded and on their way to make their delivery right on schedule. Linda pulled in and parked in the same location as before. Richard arrived a few moments later and parked in his usual place. Once they entered the room, I let them about 10 minutes to settle and then, in the pouring rain, I lifted the jack from the van and wheeled it down to Richard's vehicle. I slid the jack under his vehicle and started it up. It only took about a minute for me to hear that wonderful pop as the nails punched through the oil pan. I lowered it back down and went to the back of the Corvette. Within seconds, I heard the identical pops in the fuel tank. Oil and gas began spilling out like mad. I grabbed the jack and ran back to the van. The entire process took less than a minute. I went over to Linda's car and chopped up 2 valve stems again with that. I was ready to go. I drove past Richard's car, flicked a lighted cigarette out the window, and took off. I looked back and saw flames shooting up, followed by a bang as I left the lot. I felt a weight lifted from my chest. Linda arrived home late from work, skipped supper, and immediately fell asleep. I hung out with the boys for a while, got them washed up and tucked them in. I ended up crashing on the couch that night. Come dawn, Linda stayed in bed while I prepared the boys for daycare. We ate breakfast and hit the road. She didn't move. Didn't say anything. I didn't inquire. I noticed her car wasn't in the driveway around 9:00 a.m. We had just finished loading all of the trucks when Lieutenant John Fritz paid me a visit. He seemed well. I was asked about my job schedule the day prior, just the typical delivery. Nothing out of the usual. Why did they want to know what I was up to around noon? I grabbed the delivery logs from the day before and spread them out. I showed him each stop the products removed, the unloading time and my initials. He smirked slightly and responded, "That is one heck of a log. You do this every day. Want to see the logs from the last month?" He shook his head, grinning. I was left wondering if that was a good sign or not. "Do you want to spill something?" After some probing, he finally spilled the beans apparently. There was a car crash at the Holiday Inn in East Omaha yesterday, and they are attempting to figure out what happened. Why me though? It turns out that another car close had its valve stem sliced. Guess whose car it was? Your wife's there. Wondering if this is just a bizarre coincidence or if there's more to it. First and foremost, I have no idea why my wife's automobile would be at the Holiday Inn. Second, what's the deal with her automobile being involved in the wreck? Oh, her car belonged to a coworker. She met with someone over lunch. They were schmoozing some business clients at the hotel. And then bang. All of this takes place during their lunch. Did you talk to the people they had lunch with? Nah. They drew a blank for names. Are you going to be honest with me? Or will we dance around all morning? He leaned back and grinned. Have you heard of a guy named Jim? I never crossed paths with him. The truth. I will take your word for it. He grins again. I hate getting involved in domestic matters. So let's hope I don't have to stop by again. Here's my card. Give me a shout if anything else comes up. All right. As he walked away, I said thank you. But you didn't really tell me squat. It's time to connect the dots. When I got home from work, Linda's car was parked in the driveway. She was chilling. Was dinner ready? She said she wasn't feeling well and called in sick. Still didn't reveal what happened, so I let it be. She went to bed early, and I took care of the boys again this time, sleeping on the couch the next day. She was up and about getting ready for work as I departed with the boys for daycare. After dropping them off, I stopped by the doctor's office and requested an STD check. Friday at work was like any other when I got home. Linda was there again after dinner. I proposed that the guys visit one of my customers' farms the next day. She asked if she wanted to participate. Knowing she'd probably decline, she remarked that she had some shopping to do. I let it slip. It didn't matter if I was shopping or on a date. The outcome is the same either way. Grace and the boys had a great day at Gilbert's ranch on Saturday. We had a great time all day. Eleanor prepared a delicious lunch. I didn't want it to end. Grace got along with the lads. And they seemed to like her too. Mr. Gilbert wasn't present, so I missed meeting him. Eleanor didn't bring up our prior conversation. And Grace seemed unaware of it. We didn't want to go home, but it was necessary. Linda didn't ask anything about our day. Didn't appear interested. The boys tried telling her about their trips, but she ignored them and gave up after a while. She wondered why I wasn't sleeping in bed anymore. So I told her work had me tossing and turning. That was it. The rest of the week was business as usual. I noticed she did nothing special on her typical day. I figured she had called off the truce, which was okay with me because I had a lot of work stacked up. I swung by a divorce lawyer I had heard of and got several pamphlets and forms. Back to normal until next Wednesday. She began her day with a morning shower and then took special care of her hair. She was wearing new black sexy lingerie and a fresh perfume. Aroma lingered around her. Even her sneakers appeared like new. I made cautious not to be caught staring and hurried out with the lads. I figured it would be a date day. Dropped the lads off. Swung by the factory to check out his parking spot. A gleaming new Porsche was parked there. I immediately noted the license plate and raced back to work. The boys were as excited about the new development as I was. We rushed through the morning deliveries, adjusted the logs a little, and assumed John Fritz would see through it, but went on anyway. We had a wonderful lengthy lunch break. Carl kept up with the deliveries while Miles went to the pool supply store and got some large bottles of hydrochloric acid. When I strolled into John Fritz's office with my pulled pork sandwiches and fries, I asked to have lunch with him. He gave me a strange look, said hello, and sat across from me. He sensed something was off. I told him I thought we might get lunch together, and he could fill me in on the car damage issue. I had to keep him engaged for almost 2 hours. It was going to be a stretch while I was playing nice. Miles was in the Holiday Inn parking lot. Found the Porsche and soaked it in acid. The trunk, fenders, deck leather seats, and floor mats were all mothballed, as were a gas tank. If somebody attempted to start the engine, it might cause significant damage. They also left some acid on the tires before he departed. I snipped the valve stems on Linda's automobile again to disguise our tracks. It was all done in 15 minutes. The only negative was not knowing how long they'd be in there. John and I talked for what seemed like eons until he asked, "What's your game, buddy?" I just wanted to make sure I had a solid alibi in case something happened with Richard Beam's automobile today. "What makes today so special?" he asked. The pulled pork sandwiches were on special. I joked and dialed the daycare center from my cell phone. "Hey Carol, this is Tom. I got caught up at work and was hoping you might give Linda a call to pick up the boys this afternoon." "Thanks a lot." I gave her Linda's number. Extension 117. "Call her as soon as possible, okay?" John leaned back and chuckled. These pork sandwiches struck the spot. There was a lull, then he spoke. "Should I call Mr. Hart to check on his car?" "Why bother?" I asked. "Wouldn't you chance to know where I could find him?" I rattled off his phone number and the hotel's room number. "Take your pick, John." Put the phone on speaker and called the motel. After a few rings, Richard Hart answered. Sounding out of breath, "Who is this?" "Detective Fritz is here," John responded. "I just wanted to give you an update. There are no leads on who tampering with your car." "Why are you phoning me? How did you obtain this number, Mr. Hart?" "I work in law enforcement." "Have you gotten a new ride yet?" "Yep, just received it." "Why the question?" "Just checking to avoid a repetition of the prior time." "Where is the automobile now?" "It is parked outside." "Is everything okay?" "Let me have a look." We could hear Richard rummaging around as he looked out the window into the parking lot. A few meters later he returned to the line. Something seems wrong. I got to dress and investigate. I will call you back soon. Okay, fair enough. But why aren't you dressed yet, Mr. Hart? This is none of your concern. I've got to go. They hung up and John gave me a smile, satisfied. Absolutely, now it's time for me to get back to work. Please let me know if you need anything. Sure thing. Perhaps we'll have lunch again next week. I hope not. We need to end this up before anyone gets hurt. I returned to the salt mines. Carl had the logs in good shape. And Miles had hidden the acid where no one would find it. Tonight at home was going to be a doozy. Linda snatched up the boys without saying anything and went to bed early. The next day John stopped by. He filled me in on the wreckage, mentioning Richard's insurance claim following the Corvette incident. The automobile was total. Richard will have to spend more than $6,000. Despite Jan's assurances about my location, he continued to point fingers at me. Sure, John knew I was involved, but he wasn't about to reveal the truth. I never found out how Linda got her tires repaired. We didn't ask. And no one offered since Linda never admitted to the mess. I figured it was time to pull the plug. My STD test came back negative. And I'd begun the divorce proceedings with the lawyer. I got the idea to go to the Gilberts' property with the boys this weekend. In Grace showed up. If not, we would stick with Eleanor. But I still hadn't found any substantial evidence of Linda's adulterous activities. The weekend went smoothly. Grace was present. And the children were ecstatic. We had a great time. We felt like a true family again. We all really missed that ambience. Grace was still unaware of the situation, but at least she wasn't nosy before I left. Eleanor gave me a reassuring slap on the back and told me everything will be fine. Then out of the blue, I was offered a new job around 100 miles away. More money, a better job. And perhaps the opportunity to buy into the company down the road. It sounded like a dream except for one snag: it meant being away from Grace. The next thing I knew, it was Wednesday. And Linda was all dressed up again. I'm not sure what this new partner was up to, but she was clearly planning another encounter. I assumed they were still frequenting the same establishment. I knew I needed to do something, but I hadn't really considered it. Eleanor Gilbert arrived as the men and I were brainstorming. She indicates for me to get in, and before I know it, we are at the facility, sneaking in via the back like VIPs directly to Mr. Gilbert's office. Eleanor makes the introductions. We get coffee and talk for a little. Then I eventually ask, what is the deal? Mr. Gilbert chuckles. It's time to close things up. Eleanor gives me the inside information. Says they've done some excavating in-house. After everything is in place, we'll strike the ground running. By the end of the day, you should have collected all of the necessary soil. If I do anything to humiliate you, Tom, I apologize in advance. It was not my aim to step on toes. We talk a little longer, and Eleanor notices my grin when the conversation turns to Grace. I try to keep it cool, but I'm quite obvious. The phone rings, and everyone is suddenly on high alert. What is the word? I get it. Thank you for the heads up. You understand what to do now, right, Mr. Gilbert smiled and gave the green light. Okay. Everything is set, let's get things started. Your wife and Richard are holed up in their customary area at the Holiday Inn. Richard arrived in a corporate vehicle, which is in violation of company policy. So we are bringing it back to the plant immediately. I hate to break it to you, but it appears that your wife has a couple of flat tires again. It appears to be becoming more of a routine. He put the phone on speaker and entered the room number. Hey Richard, this is Mr. Gilbert. Sorry to bother you, but we need to have a serious conversation. Richard stumbles over his words a bit. Yeah, sure. What's up? How did you receive this number? That isn't the point, Richard. What matters is that our legal staff has been alerted to a potential harassment situation. I need straightforward answers here, friend. So listen up. Is there a female staff present with you? There was a lull with some mumbling in the background. Yes sir, there is. Is she there by choice? Is there any pressure from you? No sir, not at all. Sir, so everything is consensual? Yes sir. Absolutely everything is voluntary. Fantastic. Thank you for being straightforward with me about this. We'll write a statement to clear things up now. Can I speak with the young lady? Linda answered the phone after some ruckus. Sir. What can I do for you, Linda? Did Richard coerce or intimidate you into joining him? No sir, he did not threaten me. That's great to hear. So the proximity was voluntary. And you felt no pressure at all, is that correct? After a break and some background noise, Linda spoke up again. Yes sir, it was voluntary. Great to hear. When you and Richard return to the plant, we will have those statements ready for you to sign. Richard, can you get back on how do you know my name? Don't worry about it, Richard, not important. Just return to the facility so we can clear this up with the legal team. He grinned as he concluded the call. Eleanor, why don't you take Tom out for a bite and return later? By then, the legal team should have completed their work, and we can all resume our normal lives. Lunch was amazing. I strained to restrain my emotions but could not thank her enough. Eleanor eventually persuaded me to keep the entire affair a secret. She also made me promise not to say anything to Grace. It was a promising sign. I informed Eleanor about the job offer, and she was pleased for me and the boys. Back at the plant after lunch, I obtained notarized copies of Richard and Linda's statements. They both insisted that their extramarital encounters were consensual. The legal team convinced me there was enough ammunition for my lawyer to file the divorce proceedings. Richard and Linda lost their jobs. Their desks were emptied before they arrived, and they were shown the door. Unfortunately, they did not have wheels. Eleanor let me borrow her car and said I could return it the next day. I dropped off the documentation at the lawyer's and had extra copies produced. One set was for Richard's wife. Then I went to the bank and closed our accounts, squared off the credit cards and cancelled them. I called the utility companies to cancel services. By Friday afternoon, then stopped by John Fritz's. I provided him an update. He chuckled. I notified the landlord I would not be renewing the lease. At work I handed in my notice. They were supportive but disappointed to see me leave. Miles followed me to the Gilbert Ranch in my truck so I could return Eleanor's wheels. It was time to get the lads and go home. I was not looking forward to walking through the door. Linda's vehicle wasn't in the driveway. When we walked in, she was crying on the couch. It was the first time she had expressed any emotion. 2 crates of her work supplies were stacked nearby. I fed the lads and turned on the television, standing by in case she wished to speak. You had to go and do it right, she sobbed. You had to wreck my entire existence. Why couldn't you just focus on your own business? You had no right to interfere with mine. I was stunned. She still saw things as though the world revolved around her. The kids and I were like background noise to her. She didn't care about Amy, our family, our life, or our plans. She didn't seem to care about them. She only cared about her own personal desires. To be honest, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders, knowing I wouldn't be stuck with her forever. I stayed quiet and went for a shower later. I got the boys ready for bed. She fled to her bedroom and closed the door. The next day I brought the boys to work. I just wanted to tie up any loose ends and ensure Carl and Miles understood the framework I had set up. We went to numerous stores to gather boxes for the move. Passing by the hotel, Linda's car was absent, so I assumed she had gotten it mended by now. Those flat tires must have depleted her shopping spree money. During the last month when we arrived home, Linda was not present. We only picked up clothes and toys. Everything else remained the same for Linda to cope with. She had no idea that the next day all of her utilities would be turned off. Damn, fate was terrible. As we backed out of the driveway, Linda was just pulling and she stood beside her car, silently watching as we drove off. I took the boys to Chuck E. Cheese and got a motel for the night. The following morning I dropped them off at daycare. I gave Carol some cookies and party favors, saying that it was the boys' last day and that I wanted them to have fun with their friends before I departed. Carol grabbed me aside. "What was the situation with your wife last week?" She was furious when I called. She demanded to know where I got the number. And when I informed her you handed it to me, she cursed a lot when she picked up the boys. She didn't say anything, but her demeanor screamed rage. I owed Carol an apology. "I kind of put you in a difficult situation. Linda was having an affair. She was holed up in the motel with her boyfriend. And I hoped that if I got you to call and terminate their little meeting, she might reassess the whole affair. But it backfired instead. She became irritated at both of us. I'll serve her with divorce papers this afternoon. And shortly after I pick up the boys, we are leaving for a new job. I confess that it was a slow move on my part. And I apologize for bringing you into it. I met with my divorce lawyer. And everything was arranged. I would have custody of the children. And Linda could visit them anytime she chose. Honestly, I didn't think she'd be particularly interested in them. We divided everything else evenly, however. There wasn't much to divide: no alimony, child support, or cash settlements. I left her everything of the furniture, appliances, and household items. I did not want any of it. She kept her automobile too. I did not want it. Having flat tires was a headache. All I had to do was deliver Linda the paperwork. If she did not find it, everything would be completed in 3 months. The divorce papers included a copy of Richard and Linda's notarized statements. The lawyer wrote a small note in the margin, indicating that the statements would remain confidential if we could agree on all aspects of the divorce. There were no questions. Her car was in the driveway, so I knew she was at home. I sat there for what seemed like forever. I adored Linda. She was the only woman I ever became close to. I assumed our relationship was normal, not recognizing I wasn't providing her requirements. She never came out and told me explicitly, and I was too inexperienced to pick up on all the hints she left. I disappointed her in so many ways. What she did was sly, but I suspected that some of it was due to my lack of attention. I knocked on our own door and it felt odd. She opened it looking exhausted. She offered me a drink, but I simply handed her the papers. She didn't bother opening them. I just gave them a glance before returning my gaze to me. Why? I questioned, unsure whether she was furious or sad. After a few moments she eventually let it out. "He smelled like cologne and you smelled like dirt. He wore fine suits whereas you wore jeans. He ate lobster and steak, while you opted for ribs and burgers. He strutted around in a fashionable coat, but you were satisfied with your workman's jacket. He drove a luxury car, but you were content with your truck. His nails were always neat and glossy, but yours were constantly dirty. He had a distinguished career, whereas you were simply a village boy. Is this enough for you? I could keep going all day if you want. I wanted a life that you couldn't give me." She continued, "I apologize. We got married, Tom. I married you for the wrong reasons. I thought you could save me from my family, but I didn't plan ahead enough. I really apologize for it. But I can't change my feelings. I adore our children. Yet I hate having them. It sounds terrible, but I don't appear to have a motherly instinct. I thought meeting someone who could fulfill my goals would make me happy, but it only made me feel more dissatisfied with my current situation. I apologize to you. I did not tell you the truth. I regret not being a better mother to my children. But I'm not regretful for pursuing my aspirations and looking for something bigger. What about a spouse? What about your partner? What about your children? What about your parents?" Her attitude shifted instantaneously. My question irritated her, and she no longer appeared regretful. "I don't give a damn about any of that," she exclaimed. "It is my time now. I want to live the life I've always wanted. But having a husband from the countryside and 2 dirty kids who don't lift a finger will not help me get there. I have your stupid documents now. Just get out so I can get on with my life well. That simplified things. I simply turned around and walked away. When I picked up the boys, Carol promised to make further calls if required. I contacted the utility companies and asked them to hold off on disconnecting until the end of the month. I felt sorrow for her, I suppose. The divorce was finalized in 3 months. I never heard from Linda. The lawyer said everything went to plan. My new position was excellent. But I missed out on the opportunity to purchase into the company someone else did, along with a plot of prime land. My supervisor indicated that they were turning it into a horse breeding farm. My work was solid, but my chances of purchasing my own home had diminished. 2 weeks later, building started next to the feed shop. We were all inquisitive about what was being built. So one of the guys approached the site engineer. It turned out to be a veterinarian clinic that specializes in treating large animals. I thought it intriguing but dismissed it as wishful thinking. They completed the entire structure in less than 60 days. The new owner was due to arrive on Saturday. On our way to get some lunch, the lads and I stopped by for a look. I was a little curious. Both lads abruptly began yelling "Grace, Grace." And lo and behold, there she was, looking better than before. Eleanor was at her side. Grace had a veterinary degree and intended to breed show horses while running the large animal clinic. She was showing the boys around the new place as Eleanor and I caught up. We all ate lunch together, and Grace expressed her enthusiasm for building a new house on the property so she might be close to her workplace. On our journey home that evening, the boys and I couldn't stop smiling. After 5 years, Grace was thriving, raising beautiful horses. Her clinic had grown extremely successful meanwhile. I'd recently opened my 6th feed store. The lads now had 2 younger sisters whom they adored. Every weekend my mother-in-law Eleanor and Mr. Gilbert would stop by. Strangely enough, I never found out what his first name was. Linda, however, never came to see the boys. I hope you enjoyed that story. Here is another one. It was an ordinary night when I got home from work on schedule. But when I opened the door, I sensed there was something off about the vibe in the house. Normally at this time, my wife Peggy would be in the kitchen making dinner. Today the house was silent and peaceful. When I stepped inside, I noticed Peggy sitting on the couch in the living room, expressionless, watching a soap opera on TV. "Honey, are you okay?" I inquired with concern, anxious. But Peggy ignored me, remaining staring at the computer, unsure whether she had heard me. I approached her and noticed that her eyes were slightly out of focus, and she appeared to be in profound meditation. "Peggy!" I shouted out again, finally garnering her attention. Peggy slowly looked up and stared at me for a time, her eyes strangely chilly before speaking. "Rob, we need to chat," a simple remark, but it elicited an overpowering sense of unease, making my heart drop and a foreboding feeling arise. Peggy had never talked to me in such a sad tone before, and it appeared that whatever we were about to discuss would not be a positive thing. "What are we talking about?" I asked, nervously, subconsciously bracing myself for her to request overtime or be accused of anything. Peggy took a long breath as if to make a final decision. "Rob, I think we should live apart for a bit." It felt like a hammer blow to my skull. My mind stopped and became blank for a few seconds. Separation, that word was never brought up between us. We occasionally have minor disagreements and arguments, as do any couples, but they are never so severe that we need to separate. But why?" I stammered, wanting to ensure that I had heard right. "That's it." Peggy's tone was forceful yet gentle. "I need some alone time to decide if it's worth prolonging our marriage." Halfway through the chat, I was experiencing shock and insecurity that I had never felt before in our marriage. These words erupted in my thoughts like a missile, devastating the relationship we had worked so hard to build over the previous 10 years. But why? Is something wrong between us? Did I do something wrong? If so, please inform me. "I'll make things right." Peggy shook her head, halting my ranting. "This is not your fault, honey. It's just that I wanted some time alone to contemplate." I gazed into my wife's eyes, which had once gleamed with joy but were now buried in a thick covering of sadness. I had no idea what she was thinking or why she had made such a rapid decision. But I realized that arguing wasn't going to help. I nodded in accord. Well, if that is what you want. My voice was little more than a hoarse whisper. I'll go somewhere else for a while to give you lots of space to consider. Regardless, I still adore you. And I hope you make the correct decision in the end. Peggy's eyes became slightly hazy as she spoke gently. Thank you for understanding, Rob. This was the beginning of our split that night. I grabbed a few essentials and headed to my friend Tom's flat. I had conflicting feelings when I left the house. I wasn't sure if I'd done something wrong, or if Peggy simply needed a break. In either case, I had no choice except to respect her decision and allow her the space and time she required. I had no idea that this separation would be such a watershed moment in my life, forever altering my perspective on marriage and love. The first day I arrived at Tom's place, he inquired about the reason for our separation, and all I could do was make a helpless gesture. Tom could see I was not in a good mood, so he didn't dwell on the matter. He placed me into the guest room and made a wonderful meal for me, intending to distract me from the predicament. Although Tom and his wife Tanya were really nice and polite, I was a touch distracted throughout the night. Peggy's remarks continued echoing in my thoughts, and I repeated them several times, studying their meaning and looking for clues. But the more I thought about it, the more perplexed I grew, and I could not comprehend the true cause for her separation. They said nothing since they knew I was in a bad mood. After supper, I returned to the guest room alone, tossing and turning in bed, tormented by a variety of thoughts that made it nearly impossible to sleep. These days lasted a week, and I lived in constant anxiety. I was afraid Peggy would seek a divorce at any moment. A month or so later, I couldn't handle the heartbreak any longer and decided to contact Peggy directly. What if she just needed some alone time to settle down? Perhaps there is a minor misunderstanding between us that can be remedied via discussion. With a ray of hope, I mustered the courage to enter that familiar home again. Peggy, are you there? I shouted as I stood in the living room. The house remained as nice and organized as before, and there was no evidence that Peggy had made any modifications. Rob. She stepped out of the bedroom with a tired voice. I hurriedly followed her in and discovered Peggy seated cross-legged on the bed in loungewear. Her hair was a little disheveled. We hadn't seen her in over a month, and she appeared thinner than usual with black circles under her eyes. How have you been? I inquired with concern. Peggy nodded gently but said nothing. I took a deep breath and decided to get straight to the point by asking the subject that had been plaguing me. Peggy, what is wrong? Why are you discussing separation? Did I do something wrong? Or have you stopped loving me? My voice choked up as I delivered those final words. Simply saying the words doesn't mean you love me anymore made me feel terrified that this was the truth. Peggy grimaced as if she was reluctant to give me the truth. After a long time she said, Rob, we had some problems in our marriage. But it wasn't all your fault. I am partly at fault. What the hell is going on? I pleaded. Please say the truth. I already know the truth. Peggy sighed and buried her head, remaining silent for a long while. All we could hear in the room was each other's heavy breathing. Rob, she was hesitant to speak, as if unsure what she wanted to say. I held my breath and stared closely at the side of my wife's face, waiting for her to speak. Something happened to me recently that made me question the purpose of our marriage. Yet discussing it now could harm you and our relationship. Her unclear response caused me to freeze on the spot. I could only guess one outcome. There was a third party who influenced her opinion of our marriage. I nearly broke down. 1,000 words came to me, but they were eventually reduced to a lame question. What the hell is going on? Peggy shook her head, offering no further explanation. It appears that today it is tough for me to get a reason from her. Very well, if you prefer not to discuss it right now. That is fine. I took a deep breath, attempting to keep a last ounce of calm. I will give you time to let me know when you are ready. However, Please consider hard before making mistakes that you will regret for the rest of your life. With those remarks, I turned around and exited the bedroom, walking out of that once comfortable house without looking back. As I walked back to Tom's house, disappointment, rage, anxiety, and other complex feelings raced through my mind. I was terrified I'd lose my mind on the trip. Fortunately, Tom and Tanya were not home, otherwise I would have been caught up in a tornado of explanations. In the weeks preceding my separation from Peggy, I was on edge. I kept going over what she had said when she filed for divorce, looking for signs in the thick of my struggle. I decided to engage a private investigator to find out what she was hiding, a truth that I never expected to see came crashing down on me. One day I went to supper with my pals Tom and Tanya. Around the dinner table, the three of them conversed and joked, and the atmosphere was pleasant. But when the subject of Peggy came up, Tom and Tanya's faces turned unpleasant. "What is wrong with you two?" I inquired suspiciously, seeing the difference in their expressions. Tom and Tanya exchanged glances as if they were discreetly considering whether to tell me the truth. Finally, Tanya coughed lightly and spoke with concern. "Rob, we may have to tell you the truth about Peggy." My heart was beating, and Tanya's stern demeanor gave me a horrible feeling. "What the hell is going on? Do you know anything?" I inquired, unable to hide my fear. Tom sighed and glanced at me troubled. "Rob, you need to be prepared. Just tell me what the hell happened." I raised my voice and interrupted. Tom and Tanya exchanged glances as if to ensure that the other would tell the truth. Finally Tanya nodded and Tom said, "Rob, Peggy. She's been with him for almost a year and is still in an unsuitable relationship." My eyes widened in disbelief. "What? Are you implying that Peggy cheated on me?" Tom nodded, his expression remorseful. "Yes. I apologize for telling you so late." What happened next seemed like a nightmare. My mind became blank. My blood appeared to be draining out of my body, and breathing got difficult. I had assumed that Peggy had filed for divorce for some reason during her marriage, but it now appeared that she had found a new lover. Anger, betrayal, shame, all of these complex feelings raged like a tempest in my heart. I couldn't believe I was the last one to know the truth. Did my friends and family already know what was going on behind the scenes? Why didn't they tell me sooner? Were they laughing at my idiotic husband? Did you all know about this? I asked Tom and Tanya with clenched teeth. "I'm sorry, Robert. We also assumed it was a misunderstanding at the moment, so we didn't dare to act arbitrarily. Who could have predicted that things would have progressed to this point?" Tom looked at me kindly. "If you're open to hearing, we'll tell you everything we know next." Tom and Tanya told me everything they knew. I didn't say anything, simply listened, staring at the table without moving. When they were finished, I exhaled deeply, feeling as if my life had been crushed to pieces. My wife had been conducting an affair behind my back for years. When she mentioned she had to work extra hours to socialize or travel, that Adam White guy might have been waiting for her in the shadows. But I, the stupid Joe, didn't comprehend the gravity of the situation and assumed she was simply distracted with her work. That night, I stayed awake virtually all night till daylight. My mind was racing with hypotheses and questions, and I tossed and turned, contemplating the significance of this marriage if, as Tom and Tanya stated, Peggy had not been true to our relationship for more than a year. Was there any reason for our marriage to continue? The following morning, I left Tom's house early and drove directly to Peggy's office building. My fury was at its zenith, and I wanted to see the truth for myself rather than listen to others. Peggy's office building is located in the city center, towering over the clouds. A layer of metal-coated facade glitters in the sunlight. I walked straight into the lobby, eager to go right in. But when the security officer asked me, I realized it was the weekend, and Peggy would not be in the office. I had to control my rage and walk around to Peggy in our house. Sure enough, her car was parked in the driveway, and she appeared to have stayed home. My mood abruptly changed, and I had an incredible sense of serenity. The fury of the previous few hours had subsided, replaced with a tremendous need to discover what had happened. I have made up my mind no matter how Peggy replied. I must hear the horrible truth from her mouth. If she confesses, it will split up in divorce. If she denies it, I will not hesitate to quit my relationship with her because her cheating conduct is more than clear. Tom and Tanya witnessed the proof, which is present. I took a deep breath and pressed the doorbell. After a while, Peggy opened the door. I could tell she was fatigued and powerless, and her previous radiant appearance had faded. When she realized it was me, her countenance turned even bleaker and more hopeless. "Shouldn't you be staying with Tom?" she asked as she opened the door. What brought you here? I should not have come." I nodded with a bland tone. But there was something I needed to confirm in person. I took a big breath and spoke solemnly. "Peggy, have you had an inappropriate relationship with another man?" Peggy's expression froze, and she took an unintentional half-step back. "So, you already know?" I asked, pressing. "Because you can no longer be in a relationship." Peggy bit her lip and averted my sight. Only after a long while did she nod gently in response to my question. This move seemed like a tremendous punch to the heart, and I struggled to keep my cool. I said, "How long have you been in a relationship? Who is it? Is this Adam White your co-worker?" Peggy's body shook dramatically, and it appeared that I had fully exposed her untruth. After discovering that Peggy had lied to and misled me for years, I was filled with rage and a desire for vengeance. I began to quietly consider how I could give Peggy a head start while making her pay for it. First and foremost, in the early stages of our separation, I began transferring the majority of the family finances to a secret account in order to avoid future separation and divorce the property divide, which would result in too much loss for me. After all, I had nearly completely built up our savings over the years while Peggy remained at home to raise her children. Next, I began to utilize her credit card's hard overdraft and took advantage of the opportunity to exact revenge. Box by box. As long as it was a luxury item of some kind, I would go online or to a real store, regardless of the cost. Within a few weeks, I had maxed up all of Peggy's credit cards. And just in case she discovered, I moved the address where the Toms were mailed to Tom's address. Tom was taken aback when he discovered my activity and attempted to discourage me from doing something so damaging. However, as he discovered that Peggy had cheated on him, his attitude changed dramatically. As a buddy who knows both of us best, he could sense my rage and violence, so in the end, Tom chose to sit back and observe, neither supporting nor opposing my actions. When Peggy noticed something was wrong and confronted me, I gave her the entire tale. Of course, I would not confess to cheating on her. I simply stated that I had already prepared all of the processes for the divorce, that my financial accounts and credit cards were under my control, and that there was no need to seek her consent. Peggy was so furious that she threatened to call the cops on me, but she was quickly crushed when I consented to a divorce. After all, there was no longer any reason for us to stay together, and she recognized this as the truth. Even after punishing Peggy financially, I still felt an emptiness in my heart. Money isn't enough. I want to lower her self-esteem as a result. I began to prepare to enjoy the pleasure of cheating. As expected, it didn't take long for me to find a newly made bed. Tanya, one of my dearest friends from college, is now married and has a child. However, she and her husband Tom have been having marital issues. Tom suffers from a male biological problem that has kept them from having children for many years. I only became aware of this privacy by accident when I told Tanya about my split with Peggy. She made a bold and somewhat strange request of me. Tanya took me aside discreetly on a Saturday afternoon visit to Tom's residence. "Rob, I know how horrible you must be feeling right now, but I have a favor to ask you." Tanya stared at me hesitantly, her cheeks flushing. "What is it? Please tell me." Curiosity filled my head. Tanya took a big breath and appeared to be summoning up the confidence. "I know this seems weird, But will you assist Tom and me have a baby? I was taken aback and looked at her with distrust. You're telling me you are going to assist you two get pregnant? Tanya nodded in panic, as if she had decided to make the request. I was more embarrassed than before. But Tanya, this is insane. How could you possibly think of doing this? I am your best friend. You aren't asking me to cheat on you. Tanya expressed her concern. I know it sounds irrational, but as you know, Tom has had that difficulty for a few years now. We cannot achieve our goals no matter how hard we strive. But having a kid is extremely important to us, Rob. It's the biggest dream of Tom and my marriage. If you are truly willing to assist, we will remember this favor. I gazed at Tanya in surprise, unable for a minute to determine if she would accept such a bizarre request. You do not have to respond just now. Simply think about it. Tanya stared at me hopefully. Whatever you choose, we will always cherish our friendship. But if you can actually help, it will be the most appreciated thing Tom and I have ever done. After that, I sat alone in Tom's guest room, thinking about it for a long time. My heart felt conflicted. Tanya's suggestion was so deviant that it amounted to asking me to commit adultery with her and betray my friends. But on the other side, if I can truly help them realize their greatest ambition and create a happy family, isn't that a good thing? Furthermore, after years of Peggy's deception, I have acquired a strong contempt for her. If I also cheat, we'll just have to clear our accounts regardless. She has already betrayed me. I am only repaying the favor. After a night of thinking, I approached Tanya the next day and gravely stated, "Okay, I'll do whatever you want. I will do everything I can to assist you and Tom have a child." Tanya was pleased and embraced me tightly. "Thank you, Robert. I promise you're the best friend in the world. Whatever happens in the future, I'll remember this kindness." Since then, Tanya and I have had some bizarre personal interactions. It was all for the common aim of getting Tanya pregnant with my child. So, we would quietly pray that this time it would work. Tanya called early one morning, perhaps 3 months later, and inexplicably begged me to come over immediately. When I arrived at Tom's residence, she eagerly informed me of my pregnancy. We hugged each other and grinned. Our hearts were filled with enormous joy. "This is what we've been waiting for." "What do I tell Tom?" Tanya asked hesitantly. I thought about it and decided to respond as follows. "Just inform him you're pregnant and let him figure out the rest." Tanya nodded, clearly not thinking about how to tell her husband the full story. We both vaguely resolved to bury the ridiculousness of the deal forever. Since then, my plot of vengeance has been nearly fulfilled, both monetarily and mentally. I dealt Peggy a severe blow, and at Tanya's request, I also felt the satisfaction of cheating to see how Peggy had violated my affections for many years. When the kid is born, I will keep my promise to Tanya and be as involved as possible in the child's life. As for Peggy, I believe she will learn about Tanya and me sooner or later. And once she does, she will understand how horrible it is to be betrayed. Almost 6 months have passed since Peggy and I formally split. During this time, we have had almost little touch with one another. I knew she still lived in our old house and worked for the company, but I had no idea what her life was like now. She appeared to have fully rejected me as her husband, leaving everything between us behind. My friendship with Tanya grew stronger as her tummy swelled. I became connected with her life. She would frequently invite me to her and Tom's home, and Tom appeared to be understanding and tolerant. I constantly prayed in my heart that Tanya would bear my child this time. If that's the case, it'll be our most treasured bond, more precious than any monetary or material asset. Tanya was about to give birth at the end of the year, and I spent the entire time with her. Not wanting to miss the delivery, I stayed by her side virtually all day and night, afraid I'd miss her delivery. And Tom didn't grumble about it. He appeared to realize I was doing this as a friend. Tanya grabbed her tummy and distorted her face as we were watching TV at Tom's house on a cold winter night. "What's the problem, honey?" Tom inquired hesitantly. Tanya simply nodded as if she were gritting her teeth. "We need to get to the hospital right now, Rob. Come on, drive Tanya to the birthing room." Tom gave a loud order without saying anything. The three of us hopped into the car and drove furiously to the closest hospital. Fortunately, everything went smoothly once we arrived at the hospital. Tanya was delivered quickly by the doctor, and the three of us were enjoying the new addition to our family in less than 30 minutes. "Rob, it's a female. Look, it's a stunning young girl." The nurse handed us the small creature when I stared at the little wrinkled face in the swaddling clothes. I felt a strong sense of intimacy. This was the child Tanya and I had created in that manner. The most important tie between us. "It looks like she inherited your eyes," Tanya replied to me with a smile. "Indeed. Those eyes resemble mine." Tom approached me shortly after the baby was born, holding her in his arms. "It's time to give her a name." I froze and did not respond for a moment. Yes. Per the arrangement, I should have the right to name the child. But what shall I call her at that time? I remembered a name. Chelsea is the protagonist of one of my favorite films. Chelsea. They shared the same sparkling eyes and naive demeanor. "Chelsea, let's call her," I spoke to Tom. Tom nodded and smiled. "Chelsea, what a wonderful name. It's ideal for such a precious little angel." Tanya and I were then formally given the name Chelsea. Chelsea's birth certificate listed my name in the father field after the hospital finalized the birth. During the months following the birth of my child, I made occasional trips to Tom's place to see Chelsea, and, possibly because blood is thicker than water, this youngster gave me a sensation of connection that I had never experienced before. Every time I saw her, I felt a warm sensation in my heart. Without recognizing it, Chelsea has become the most essential link between Tanya and myself. Even though we had crossed the border at some point, we were getting even closer now that we had this youngster to connect with. I would occasionally witness Tom's attitude toward Chelsea. I expected him to be more indifferent to his daughter because she is not his blood relative. What I didn't expect was Tom to regard Chelsea the same way, with no concerns based on how he looked at her. I saw no animosity, only overwhelming love. I truly admired this friend. He accepted Chelsea's existence with grace and never accused Tanya or myself of cheating. He was able to do this because he loved Tanya and her family so much. Just as Chelsea turned 1, Peggy's divorce was eventually filed against me. It marked the end of a long romance. The divorce proceedings in court did not take long. Peggy got almost little out of it since I had already relocated most of my possessions elsewhere. She only kept our first residence. And when she heard the judgment, she gave me sole custody of Chelsea. Peggy was upset, but she couldn't help but sign the ruling. Looking at her enraged and helpless, my heart did not fluctuate too much. After so much torment and entanglement, I've had no feelings for her for quite some time. Shortly after the divorce, I moved to an apartment near Tom's family so that I could see Chelsea anytime I wanted. But Peggy was required to remain in our previous home. However, I had mortgaged it to the bank, so she didn't actually own it for a while. Peggy tried everything she could to get at me, asking why I was treating her so poorly. But every time I saw her, I would reflexively glance at the diamond on her hand, her engagement ring to Adam White, so I simply disregarded her allegations and devoured them completely. Peggy gradually recognized she couldn't make a difference and focused on her new life. I heard she abandoned her previous job and relocated to California. So she vanished from my life. I, on the other hand, committed the majority of my time and attention to Chelsea's life, possibly worried that I would become a second Tom. Tanya and I never wavered in our support for Chelsea. In fact, she welcomed and pushed me to do so, viewing Chelsea as the most important connection between the two of us. As a result, Chelsea was naturally raised in Tom's household with her biological father. I frequently picked her up and dropped her off at school, fed her healthy meals and took her on weekend trips. Tanya would occasionally join us, but the majority of the time, Chelsea was just the two of us. Tom appeared to know that he couldn't play the father position in the family and grew increasingly unconcerned in Chelsea's affairs. But he tried his best to make money and provide us with adequate space. Chelsea eventually came to think of me as her father and Tanya as her mother. Chelsea gradually matured into a stunning young woman. The two of them would come to my flat to stay for a bit. And they would occasionally request to go on brief trips together. I have always been very supportive and loving of my daughters and lovers' desires. Chelsea started asking me questions one summer about why Mommy and Daddy lived in two different areas. She seemed to be aware and wary of this because Mom and Dad love each other but are unable to marry, therefore we had to live separately. Tanya explained, as she always does, why we couldn't get married. Chelsea instantly inquired again. Because Tanya kindly responded that one of us is married to another person. But now that they've gone, perhaps we'll get married in the future. Tanya formally proposed marriage to me when Chelsea was 12 years old. The cause wasn't complicated. She believed that providing Chelsea with a complete family would be the most responsible and caring thing she could do. But you still have Tom. I was hesitant. Despite the fact that Tom rarely lived with Tanya, they were still legally married. Tom is. Tanya told me with sadness that he had died. His health did not improve over the last 6 months. And he died. I was upset by my friend's death and heartbroken that Tanya would have to raise Chelsea alone. With this in mind, I consented to marry her without hesitation. The wedding was a small affair with only a few friends and family invited to the ceremony. But Chelsea was so thrilled that she took weeks to plan the wedding herself. Mom and Dad are finally getting married. I'm quite happy. My daughter was so delighted that she threw her arms around both of us. And tears welled up in the corners of her eyes as she saw Chelsea's flaming innocence. I immediately felt like it was all worthwhile. All of the betrayals, hurts and tears, as well as the hardships and struggles, have finally come together to produce this comfortable family photo. Our family of 3 was finally able to be fully joined via the bond of marriage. Life after marriage was uneventful and enjoyable. I continued to work for my old company and arrived home on time every day. Tanya devoted herself to housekeeping and occasionally worked as a teacher in a nearby elementary school in Chelsea, where she had already grown up and was approaching the age of youth. Peggy was forced to leave her hometown and relocate to California following a divorce and financial difficulty. She had lost her family, her belongings, and her career, and her life was in limbo. My relationship with Tanya continues, and our daughter is growing up healthy and happy. I maintained my word to Tom and have been a strong supporter of Tanya and our kid. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.